And I think that we get lost in this idea of, oh, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to get thousands of downloads and hundreds of thousands of sponsors are going to come and they're going to want to pay me and all of these different things that's not exactly how podcasting works. Podcasting is a long game. Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. So often as podcasters, it can be so easy to get distracted by the numbers and the downloads, and that's not really what I want to focus on this show. If you've been listening for any amount of time, you know how I feel about download numbers. You know how I feel about listener numbers, that it's not about the number of people that are listening, but are you actually converting them into leads? Are you having those conversations outside of your podcast that are showing that your podcast is working toward your goals? And are those goals in alignment with actual business growth and actual brand growth? Or are they just arbitrary numbers that you think are important? That is what I want to talk about. So today we're going to talk about some podcast milestones to actually consider and celebrate. Let's start by going through some downloads because I want to set the record straight here. Please and thank you. Buzzsprout, and you guys know how I feel about Buzzsprout. They give a podcast platform stats every month. I absolutely love that they do that. Right now, they have over 121,000 active podcasts on their platform. Of those 121,000 active podcasts, the majority of those podcasts get about 25 to 30 downloads in the first 7 days of an episode going live. So if you get 30 downloads in the first 7 days of your episode going live, you are automatically in the top 50% of podcasts that are hosted through Buzzsprout. And those are active podcasts. I love that they're giving this information because, and as I talk through this, you're going to hear me talk about active versus non-active podcasts and why it's important to actually base our stats on the active podcasts rather than the ones that have started up and failed so quickly. But I love that they're giving this information because you can go back a few months, see what the stats were then, see if the number of active podcasts on Buzzsprout has gone up or gone down, what that's looked like. Most of our clients land in the top 25% for their podcast, for the number of downloads that they get in the first 7 days of an episode going live. And that's if they get over 100 downloads, then they are automatically in the top 25% of podcasts on Buzzsprout. Now, what this allows us to see is not just, oh, you got 100 downloads, cool, right? Also, 100 downloads for an episode is incredible. And I think that we get lost in this idea of, oh, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to get thousands of downloads and hundreds of thousands of sponsors are going to come and they're going to want to pay me and all of these different things that's not exactly how podcasting works. Podcasting is a long game. That's just one way that our podcast listeners absorb content is they like to absorb a lot of it at once. And the majority of podcast listeners who are active listeners, where they listen regularly and they're bingers, they tend to listen to about 8 to 9 shows per week. So keep that in mind as you are creating your content and as you are creating these goalposts for yourself for your podcast. Now, I'm going to kind of throw this on its head for these milestones because this is not just going to be an episode where I'm going to say, if you get this many downloads, celebrate it. No, we're going to talk downloads. We're also going to talk years. We're going to talk episode numbers. There's a lot to celebrate that these milestones I think is going to be really important, and celebrate all of them, right? And at the end, maybe I'll give you some ideas I'll definitely give you some ideas on how to celebrate that, and even ways that you can use that as a way to give your episodes some juice, give your podcast some juice, maybe increase your listenership as well. So even though we've talked about these downloads and these numbers that you are able to get, it's important that we remember that most people don't make it in podcasting, that there are a lot of podcasters that pod fade. Now, I was listening to a podcast recently. I wasn't able to verify these statistics that this individual gave. We'll make sure we link it in the show notes, but the information is very similar to what I've seen. So this might be like this is the general idea, but let's just go ahead and get into these stats. 90% of podcasters don't make it past 3 episodes. So if we're looking at 2 million podcasts, just to give us a nice round and even number, if 90% of those podcasts don't make it past 3 episodes, so I don't know if that 3rd episode is actually the number. The part that I've seen has been either 10 episodes or 7 episodes. So if we give ourselves some wiggle room with this number of episodes, let's just say that 90% of the podcasts don't make it past 10 episodes. Of those 2 million podcasts, that takes away 1.8 million podcasts that have quit after 10 episodes. Of the 200,000 that are left of that 2 million, 90% of those podcasters will quit after 20 episodes. That's another 180,000 podcasts gone. Now, to be the top 1% of the world, and this is not in downloads, this is in releasing regular podcast episodes and releasing a certain number of podcast episodes, you have to publish 21 episodes. So it's important to remember that when you're looking at podcasting and you're looking at 2 million podcasts and oh my goodness, how am I going to rank against those 2 million podcasts and how am I going to be able to show up? You're not competing against them for their download numbers. You're not competing against them for their audience levels. That doesn't matter. If you want to have an achievable podcast milestone, 21 episodes is achievable. It is possible. During the strategy sessions that we do with our clients before they launch, we actually have one strategy session, or the majority of that conversation is dedicated to planning out the first 10 to 15 episodes, just to put you in that top 10%. I don't care if you work with us beyond your launch. You should have 10 episodes at least that you can talk about. And it's important that if you're looking at podcasting and you want to grow a podcast, then you're creating milestones that are actually things that you can achieve, that are things that are not arbitrary numbers like thousands of downloads. You need hundreds of thousands of followers just to get thousands of downloads. You need more than 50 episodes, more than 100 episodes to be able to achieve thousands of downloads, even with hundreds of thousands of followers. And I don't think that people realize that your followers does not equal podcast listeners always. Yes, there is going to be some overlap between the two, but it's not an apples for apples comparison of, oh, I have 50 million followers on Instagram. That means I'm going to have 50 million downloads in that first week. No, that's not how this works. It's not how podcasting works, especially if you're not putting in the marketing to do it correctly. Now, these numbers, though they may not be entirely accurate or they might be a little iffy on the stats, like these stats are ones that I have seen. I have seen that most people don't make it past 20 episodes. As some people have said that it's 25 episodes. Either way, if you can make it in podcasting past that 20th episode, past that 25th episode, you deserve to celebrate. So here are some podcast milestones, some podcast benchmarks that I think that you should celebrate. Number 1, your launch. Celebrate it. Celebrate that podcast launch despite the number of downloads you get. Episode 25. Celebrate that. Go bananas with it. Make sure that you are shouting it out to the rooftops. episode 50. If you hit 50 episodes, you should be doing a happy dance, go get yourself a coffee, do a whatever you want to do that makes you happy. A friend of mine got me a t-shirt that says, "Careful or you'll end up on my podcast." I love this t-shirt so much, and I think that it's a great hoorah gift to give myself if she hadn't already gotten it for me. I have another friend where she has a mug that says podcast time, or I'd rather be podcasting. Yes, that's what it says. I'd rather be podcasting. Get yourself something like that. Something that is like, yes, I am doing it. I am doing incredible things with my show. People are listening. I have sat down and recorded over 50 episodes. Yes, that is incredible. The next milestone that I think that you should celebrate is 100 episodes. Now, this is a number, and anything over this number, 100, 150, 200, those are going to be those next milestones that I think that you should celebrate if you reach them. Now, I want to give you some very strategic things that you can do. And I recently had a conversation with someone about this where she wanted to create a little bit more excitement for her show. And I was like, well, we did this with a client for her 200th episode, and I think that it's a great idea. So here is your tip, trick, strategy for reinvigorating your audience once you hit these top milestones: 100 episodes, 150 episodes, 200 episodes. Switch up the way that you do your podcast. Maybe you have someone interview you on your show. Ask you about your journey. Ask you about things you've learned for your podcast. Another thing that you can do to promote that 100th episode, 150th episode, or that 200th episode, this is very similar to our launch strategy, creating that excitement for your launch. You can hear all about that in our episode where we talk about the things that you need in your podcast launch. We'll make sure we link that. But this is something that we do for launches that I think can work really well for podcast milestones like the 100th episode, 150th episode, or 200th episode. And that is reaching out to past guests that you've had on your show, letting them know that you are hitting this crazy awesome milestone. You would love it if they would shout it out and share about it somewhere. They can decide where, who cares, right? Like just creating this excitement that's not just you being like, yay, I hit this thing. Get other people in on it. I'm sure that your guests would be more than happy to talk about your show, to talk about, oh, I was on this episode. Make sure that you send them a link to their episode in case they're like, wait, I was on like 100 podcasts in the last 3 years. Which one was yours? Send them that link. Tell them what you loved about their episode and how maybe you got this feedback from someone who listened and they loved this one part. Whatever it is, create that excitement around your episode to ensure that you're not just going in to celebrating these massive milestones by yourself. Get other people on board. So I've given you some ideas as well as some milestones that I think are great benchmarks and achievable benchmarks for you. Now, notice that I didn't spend a lot of time on the 100th, 150th, or 200th episode other than those like that major way to celebrate, because I think that you should celebrate that 25th episode. I think that you should celebrate that 10th episode. I think you should celebrate once you hit a year in podcasting. Celebrate that you hit 2 years in podcasting. Those are still things that you can celebrate. And there's a very small percentage of people that make it to 100 episodes, 150 episodes, 200 episodes. So if you're not sure if you're going to make it to that, celebrate the wins that you have before that. And if you pod fade, at least you are already in that top percent because you have achieved what a huge percentage of podcasters have not achieved. And so that deserves to be celebrated. So those are my achievable podcast milestones that I think you should celebrate them with some ways that you can celebrate if you have a podcast milestone that you are hitting in the next month. I don't care when that is, in the next month, whenever you're listening to this episode. If you have that happening, send me a DM. I want to be able to share that, shout it out for you because that is incredible. I will happily share that. All right. Until next time, guys, I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.